coil structure is not pulled back into the damper, and there's not enough of a frictional coefficient over time, and with some cartridges, it's as little as 10 hours, the skating forces will rotate that stylus out of alignment. You can start with it aligned, come back 10 hours later, that thing's going to be rotated out. And I can't mention brands or models, obviously, as a manufacturer, but I can tell you I've seen a lot of certain brand, certain models come into us brand new, either after an accident or after a relatively short number of hours, 10 or 20 hours, with the stylus as much as 10 degrees moved out of alignment. And I can literally rock it back, easily set back, and it's like, well, this cartridge has been designed wrong or manufactured wrong. So it is a tendency with some moving coil where an accident or unbalanced skating forces can move the stylus out of alignment once you've aligned it. I can tell you that with the SoundSmith designs, it's impossible. You can grab the cantilever, not recommended, and rotate it 30 degrees and let go, and it'll snap right back to where it was, and it'll stay like that. Once you've done a mechanical azimuth alignment with the SoundSmith cartridge, that's it for the life of the cartridge. You're never going to lose that azimuth adjustment. It's because the moving system is bonded to the suspension and the damper. There's no chance for it to slip out of alignment. But it's a very good question, and it's an important question because you can set up a cartridge and 20, 30 hours later say, this thing sounds bad. And if you were to look head on, you'd go, whoa, how come the stylus is wonky? And that's why. All right, John, you said there was another question.
Yeah, which cartridges are hardest to retip?
Is the question about SoundSmith cartridges or cartridges in general?
It just says which cartridges. Mats, you want to chime in?
Mats? I think he was talking in general.
Okay.
In terms with your experience.
No, SoundSmith. No,
He's saying SoundSmith?
Which SoundSmith?
No. I think it was referring to not SoundSmith.
Not SoundSmith. Okay.
Not SoundSmith.
So certainly styli that have extremely fragile cantilevers, such as the Short V15, which is a rolled beryllium foil. Cartridges that have also incredibly fragile cantilevers like a hollow boron or ceramics. Those are often laser drilled to accept the diamond, and very, very difficult to remove just the stylus and attempt to do a retip only. Certainly I've done it. I've retipped about everything that exists, but there are certain cantilevers that are so fragile you can't reliably remove the stylus and retip them. I've certainly developed techniques for doing it to some incredibly reliable fragile cantilevers, but in general, those would be the most difficult. Other than that, I've been doing it a lot, so there are different degrees of difficulty for different cantilever materials, but generally I've learned and developed techniques for doing it. So except for the certain esoteric types that I've just mentioned, generally if you're doing a retip only, that is leaving the original cantilever, the degree of difficulty has not a terribly wide variance. All right, I'll just leave it at that.
Peter, can I follow up? Your answer was great. So I was wondering if what you were saying about using the USB microscope head-on for azimuth. So in a practical manner where we may just have that USB microscope as our tool, we want to start out by sort of setting it vertically, and then do we want to do it by listening to it to see that level on the SoundSmith cartridge where you really get that sort of pop in the separation? Are we going to do that by listening to it, or are we going to use some sort of tool for that?
Sure, there are a bunch of different ways of doing it. The SoundSmith, well, let me back up a little bit. A good cartridge, I need to talk a little bit about channel separation and its significance and tweaking the azimuth with regard to that. So a good cartridge will be typically between 25 and 30. I was surprised years ago when I no names, no brands, no models mentioned, but with a $5,000 cartridge that I was installing for a gentleman, that I was only getting 28 dB of channel separation. And I thought, a little low. And I looked up the spec, and that's what the spec was. In audio, I want to say a little bit about this because it's really, to me, it's very interesting. Hopefully it will be some interest there as well. We all know that measurements are, I won't say meaningless at all, but measurements in audio are not going to tell you how something is necessarily going to sound. That's because audio equipment, obviously more electromechanical transducers than electronics to a degree, have most of their DNA, or not most, they have a lot of their DNA in the camp of musical instruments, and only a certain percentage in the camp of scientific instruments. And there are reasons for that. One of them is that if you're doing a cartridge or a microphone, when you get below a certain scale, things are uncontrollable. So it's left to chance, again, below a certain scale. Loudspeaker, the same is partly true. I was director of engineering of Bozak back in the 70s and got to work with Rudy Bozak for a number of years, which was a delight. And he was one of the most intuitive engineers I ever met. And the thing about loudspeaker design is that a lot of it is intuitive. You have to do the right things, and you have to have a good understanding of the basics. But beyond that, it requires intuition and experimentation in order to start to improve things. I remember, and I've told this story a number of times, designing a loudspeaker, and Rudy came by to listen to it, and he politely listened for 30 seconds and got up to leave the sound room. And he turned to me and he said, when you're designing, a loudspeaker system, there are 10 things you'd like to do. You're only going to get to do 3 of them. You better pick the right things. And he left. And at first I thought he had dissed me, and then I realized he'd distilled a lifetime of wisdom and laid it on me in a few seconds. He was correct. It requires a very judicious selection of what you think is important, and do those 3 or 4 things really well and tweak everything else as best as you can. So again, measurements in loudspeaker in audio equipment generally they don't tell the whole story. You have to listen to something. There is one measurement with cartridges which can tell you a lot about the cartridge, and it's a fascinating thing, and it's channel separation. I'm going to try to do, since this is such an important subject, I'm going to try. Oh, let's see. You folks are going to have to tell me if you can. Great. Firefox cannot allow permanent access to your screen. I have no idea what that means.
Neither do I.
Oh, permanent, because I clicked remember this decision. Don't allow, will allow meet. This is really interesting. Wow. So it's not going to let me share my screen. How interesting. Who knew?
That's weird.
Let's try this. If you trust, remember this decision. Let's try this.
Somebody who's running it has to let people share. It's not automatic.
All right, so I'm not allowed to share my screen. All right, so I'll.
So where do I choose that? Because I don't see that option in the present now mode.
All right, so you know what? I'm going to go without it if I can only reduce this, which it's not letting me do. Well, that's really.
Chris, do you understand that? Is there
well, let's see. Let me go to present mode here for a second. See if
you know what? It's all right. I'm gonna move on. So
okay.
Here's the thing about channel separation that's interesting. So when you have a cartridge, you have a stylus, cantilever, you have some mass back here. Think of the mass like a brick wall. Think of this cantilever as a broomstick. So we don't have to be Enrico Fermi to figure out what happens when you pluck the broomstick. A lot of the energy goes up into the wall. Some of it comes back and makes the broomstick do this. That's a phono cartridge. How much it does this is a function of how much mass you have at this end, first order. The energy, however, doesn't go straight up and straight back down. It rotates on its way back down. One of the things that Rudy had me do early on. I was designing a driver for a speaker I designed called the MB80. I took Rudy's 6-inch aluminum driver, and it was a fairly wideband driver, and turned it into an extremely wideband driver and designed a miniature two-way system called the MB80. And Rudy had me get a strobe, and we were driving the driver on the test bench outside the anechoic chamber, just sitting on the bench. And he had me adjust the strobe to about 60 hertz. We were driving the cone at 60 hertz. And the beautiful thing is you could actually freeze the cone or get it to move slowly and watch it because you were taking samples of it with the strobe. Well, it was fascinating because the speaker, the cone, was not moving in and out smoothly. It was doing this pitching thing as it was going up and down. Completely fascinating. I was amazed the voice coil wasn't rubbing. Basically, what happens is the energy that travels rotates and it hits the edge, the suspension in this case of a loudspeaker, and then reflects back down. All of this energy is not traveling up and down in straight lines, it's rotating. Same thing happens with a cartridge. So I'm going to point out to you, so you've got this energy coming back down the cantilever from both the natural resonant frequency in the cartridge. Any sprung mass has a natural resonant frequency, plus the reflected energy. Remember the broomstick and the brick wall. So this energy is rotating back down. When you have a stereo record, one groove wall is one channel, one is the other. So if you're modulating this groove wall, you're asking, and there's nothing on this groove wall, you're asking the stylus to slide up and down without doing this, because that'll generate a signal in the other channel. If you've got rotational energy coming back down, the stylus is going to do this. So channel separation is a real measurement of the control of energies and the intimacy of the contact between the stylus, the intimacy and statistical contact between the stylus and the groove wall. So you'd say, wow, so all I have to do is pick a cartridge that has great channel separation, and I know the stylus is taking better statistical contact with the groove. Not absolutely. As I said in the beginning, it's not an absolute measurement, because if you take a moving coil, remember earlier I talked about the wire suspension pulling that armature back into the damper. If you yank that thing really hard into the damper, you'll get really good channel separation. It's just not a cartridge you want to listen to. So the SoundSmith cartridges by design, again, a good cartridge will be 25 to 30 dB channel separation. Very good cartridge, typically 30 to 35. Very good cartridges beyond 35. The SoundSmiths typically measure between 35 and 45 dB channel separation. I've made some Hyperions that measure 53 dB channel separation. I didn't even know a Neumann lathe could cut that well. What this is telling you is that you've got very low mass here at the inside the cartridge, and our mass is 5 to 8 times, not 50 to 80%, but 5 to 8 times lower moving mass than a moving coil. So there's less inertia, less stored energy, and the resonant frequency is up higher, but importantly, the amplitude of that resonant frequency is lower. So you get less energy coming back down the cantilever, less of the stylus jitter, better channel separation. So back to azimuth adjustment. So let's say you're looking on the front and you get a good stylus alignment. You say, well, I've told you, well, you can go, a couple of degrees either way. When you do that with a good cartridge that's 25 to 30 dB channel separation, you're not going to see very much. You do with a cartridge that's 30 to 35, you're going to see one or the other, or maybe both channels improve when you get 1 to 2 degrees off. That's good. Leave it there. The stylus is going to trace fairly well. With a SoundSmith cartridge, once you get up into the stratosphere of channel separation figures, they can become asymmetrical. So one channel might measure 35, the other might measure 43. Does that mean it's a bad cartridge? No, it just tells you up at those levels, microscopic things are really affecting an asymmetry. 35 and 43 dB is a very listenable cartridge. But what can happen when you're up in that stratosphere is that very, very small azimuth adjustments will have a huge effect on channel separation. How to measure it? Well, one way is with a scope. The other way is with a millivolt meter. But you definitely want to put a little passive filter there for those of you that are into electronics. That's easily done. You just put a 100K shunt resistor and a 0.1 series capacitor, and that rolls off everything, I think, below 400 hertz, 0.1 or 0.01. I'll have to do the calculation again. And because you want to get down below the rumble, you want to really filter out all the rumble. What's the other way if you don't have any equipment or you're not electrically inclined? Well, you can listen to it. Turn the balance control over to one side. It's going to be very audible. So do a little bit of tweaking and say, all right, well, let's say it's a SoundSmith cartridge. All right, well, I hear almost nothing out of this channel, and I hear a little bleed through on this one. Tweak it a little bit to where this one gets better, the worst one gets better, and you haven't deteriorated or reduced the separation of the other channel. And if you're 1 or 2 degrees off, you're going to be fine. So that's a way you can do it by ear and still be in very, very good azimuth adjustment. So hopefully that answers that question.
Does that satisfy you, Ali?
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna give it a try.
Okay. All right. We got a couple of questions on chat, Peter. The first one's from Jose, and he asks, have you heard of analog magic?
Is that the alignment system from up in Canada?
Jose?
Yeah,
You know,
he's
Yeah. As a manufacturer, I can't comment on anyone else's product. Sorry, it's part of my audio faith tradition. Can't do it.
okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, Jose. And the next question is from John. What is your favorite Bozak speaker?
Oh, boy. I got to tell you a story. It'll be the MB80. That's really hard to answer. I'll tell one story or 2 stories about Bozak. So I designed the Listener A series, and there was an LS200A that I designed, and we sent them off. This was a 2-way, 8-inch aluminum plus wideband tweeter, modified wideband tweeter, and a first order system. And we sent them off to all the dealers, and they all, pretty much without exception, they all were returned within 2 or 3 weeks with pretty much the same note. Dear Mr. Ledermann, thank you for sending us your new LS200A. Unfortunately, we can't sell them. As soon as we turn them on the floor and demo them, we can't sell any other speaker at any price. And, I've had some interesting experiences in audio and manufacturing, and that was certainly one of them. It's a problem if you design something that's fairly low cost and that's awfully good. You won't be able to sell it through a dealer because you're going to hurt their business. So kind of a shame. The other thing is the MB80. When I was developing the MB80 miniature, I had an accident and discovered something. And I discovered a methodology for tuning a loudspeaker that actually corresponded in a very exacting way with the listening experience. That's very rare. And I went and got Rudy, and I showed him the results. I showed him the paperwork, the measurements I'd done. And he asked me, he said, how did you do this? And I said, well, it was an accident. As a lot of inventions are, they're just accidents. And you have to be awake to notice it. So he got very animated. He said nobody had ever done this before, and he wanted to come down to the lab. And we did some very minor adjustments, and to repeat the experiments. And he was really shocked. He said, you need to write a paper about this. And I said, well, I'm here 14 hours a day. I don't have time. I said, would you write it with me? And he said, yes. Even though he didn't care for me very much, which is fine. I didn't care for myself very much, especially during that period of my life. I didn't hold that against him. But he did appreciate my love of audio. And we never got to write that paper. The loudspeakers I currently have, which I was pushed into doing by one of my employees years ago, the Monarchs and the Dragonflies, are based on that design principle. But as an accident at Bozak, I created a phase-correct miniature 2-way called the MB80. The prototypes were completely phase-correct. And anything you did ruined the effect. And I do mean anything. The tiniest crossover changes. Those speakers, I've never heard a dynamic loudspeaker like that. They were, the human hearing is really interesting. I started doing a lot of research into human hearing after having that experiment or that accident and doing the experimentation. We were hunters at one point in our distant past. Some of us still are. I think they're mostly in the south and west of the United States. The way we determine where a sound is coming from is by time of arrival. So if it arrives in this ear first, we know it's generally off in this direction. Even if it's louder in this ear, if it arrives this one first, your brain's pretty good. It says it's over here. This is why when we listen to a pair of loudspeakers, generally, we hear sound coming out of boxes. There are certainly ways of fooling hearing. I've actually invented one of those, again accidentally, it's almost 50 years ago. It's a product I would love to bring onto the market. I discovered a way of presenting sound that puts you into an alpha state in about 30 or 60 seconds. You can't feel your body anymore. I want to use it for medical treatment and healing and even psychological treatment, even for general relaxation. We'll see if I have another couple of lifetimes to bring that thing to market. But so I'm not opposed to altering sound to present something in a more pleasant way. There are plenty of pieces of gear that do that. But it is interesting, what do you do with a stereo system in order to eliminate your ability to hear sound coming out of the boxes? Your brain locates them and says, there are the boxes, there's the sound coming out. And as you approach phase coherence throughout the system, an amazing thing happens. The speakers disappear. And these tiny little speakers, this was a 6-inch and a modified soft dome, you could not hear where these speakers were. There was a wall of sound. It was 20 feet tall, it was 30 feet wide, much wider than the room. It went 20 feet deep. And no matter where you walked in the room, you could not hear that there was a pair of speakers playing. Mind you, I did have some good phase coherent sources. I was using a Panasonic strain gauge and the RAM electronics at that point. But depending on the recording, it was stunning. When I went into production, I had to modify the aluminum cone slightly because I put that cone in the chamber and beat it up for 3 days and it cracked. So I had to go to our machine shop foreman and say, look, I need you to make me new parts to make different shapes here. So I changed the shape a tiny bit at the outer perimeter, lost about 30% of the coherence, couldn't get it back. The accident I had at Bozak was 1,000,000 to 1. I should not have been able to see what I saw. So I'm very grateful I had that experience because I know it's possible to develop a phase coherent loudspeaker. Everything has to fall into place. It's like 5 tumblers on a safe, except it just happens sometimes. But maybe if I ever get to retire, I have the materials to make that loudspeaker again. And it would be lovely to produce that MD80 again or a similar phase coherent loudspeaker. I must say the Monarchs that I have do that to a large degree. And if you look at show reports of SoundSmith, you'll see people that are blown away. They don't know why we can get the sound that we do. Part of it is the loudspeaker. The rest of it is everything in the chain. Now I'm going to go back a little bit. When Rudy said to me, there are 10 things you'd like to do. You're only going to get to do 3 of them. You better pick the right things. I really did take that to heart. So I've tried to do that with cartridges, obviously the strain gauge and my magnetic cartridges. I've tried to do with my electronics, preamps, power amps, loudspeakers. When you do it and you're lucky enough to choose correctly, each of those products stands really well on their own. But when you put them together, you have a situation where the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that's why over the years we've gotten really good reports on our sound at shows, even won Best of Show against rooms that have $500,000 or more of equipment in it, because of this understanding of what to attempt to do to reproduce sound really, really well, which is why all of you are here.
Yeah, and last year we were at Capital Audio Fest. How many people were at Capital Audio Fest? I know, John, you were. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And I spent several hours in Peter's wonderful room quizzing him on all sorts of vinyl questions. So it was a real treat, Peter. I do appreciate when you make it your time to come out to visit us.
Well, I'm always glad when I can be mobile. So
I had a question. I'm a lifelong vinyl collector, and I do own about a half dozen SoundSmith cartridges, among many, from the Otello all the way up to the Ada 2 I purchased recently. And I have to say, I think the Otello is a killer cartridge. I think it's way underrated. I don't think enough people know about that. I'm sure you would agree. But my question is kind of looking to the future. We've had all this history of vinyl and its ups and downs, and now we seem to be in a huge resurgence. And I know you experiment with different materials. You've got using cactus, which I find very amusing, which is kind of goes back to the early days of the Edison cylinder. They used cactus needles. Where do you see us going? Have we maxed out vinyl, or are we still? Are you just still figuring out things or discovering things? Where do you think? Where are we going with vinyl?
That's a good question. I think the resurgence, of course, has caused a lot of very good vinyl to appear and a lot of not so good vinyl to appear. I'm going to say something that probably won't answer your question very well, but I think it's important to say. Somebody once asked me years ago what the difference is between an audio engineer and a recording engineer. And although this will sound facetious, I meant it. I said, an audio engineer, a good audio engineer, will attempt to pass the signal through as little and as linear a circuit as he can. He really wants to interfere as little as possible. And that's a philosophy which I certainly learned from Richard Majestic, who I worked for and I'm still good friends with, and other people in the industry. And certainly reiterated that by the designs that I did myself. So again, minimalist, but as linear as you can possibly do. Muck with it as little as possible. A recording engineer, on the other hand, not all of them, many of them, will pass the audio signal through daisy chaining through every damn piece of equipment he owns, because he owns it. And when that thing exits out of 30 pieces of electronics, it does not represent what went in at the other end. It's a game of telephone. And I have a lot of vinyl that is just, I'm sure the master recordings are wonderful, but the vinyl isn't. And it's just really incredible. You have this medium that is phenomenal, and long before the recording winds up on the master lacquer, it gets destroyed. So when you ask where is vinyl going, I don't know. There's so little overlap between the pro industry and the consumer industry. People that master recordings aren't even listening to hi-fi speakers. They're listening to pro audio speakers. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that there's not more overlap. So, I mean, I have 2 Neumann lathes. We have a charity project called Direct Grace Records. I've done some Direct Grace recordings. It is a phenomenal thing when you have a live performer and an XY mic in front of them, and you record them and you cut it down to a dub and you pick the dub up and you bring it over and you play with the strain gauge. It's overwhelming that this medium is capable of doing something like that. Where's it going? I don't know. I fear for where it's going because the most devastating thing in audio is the loss of legacy engineers. We've lost a huge number. In 10 years, they're all going to be gone. They've not been replaced. SoundSmith has been a mentoring company, but frankly, we're not going to do anything that's going to, quantifiably rescue the industry. The industry has not been teaching young people. There were 2 generations were lost, and there are a lot of reasons for that. It's one of the reasons that I founded SoundSmith. I watched in the 60s all these other burgeoning technologies, aerospace, medical electronics, the digital realm. It just went on and on. It siphoned people away that might have gone into audio. Plus, the audio industry the U.S. audio industry was being decimated by the Japanese audio industry. There were a huge number of reasons, but we've lost engineering. So how does that bode for the future in terms of vinyl? Not well. It's unfortunate, but the answer is not well.
Got another question, Peter. What is the most interesting audio component SoundSmith has restored/repaired?
There are a lot of them. One of them was Dick Majestic had a friend who had acquired a 30s 78 system, and it had a changer in it, a 78 changer, and the cartridge used a Rochelle salt crystal. And this is similar in a sense to a crystal cartridge. It's high impedance, produces a couple of volts. But Rochelle salts are very fragile, and they're subject to degradation through environmental humidity and just aging. So he sent me this original Rochelle salt playback cartridge, and I gutted it. And although there are formulas for making Rochelle salt, I didn't want to go there. My life, I just don't have that much time. So I rebuilt it with a ceramic cartridge generator inside and made rubber parts for it and verified it could produce a couple of volts. And I sent it to the fellow, and he sent me a video of this thing playing. And he was so thrilled. He was so happy. And as was I, because this was now a cartridge that was going to last a long, long, long time. I repaired an Olsen loudspeaker, which had a dual voice coil. Had to do some very fine surgery on that. That was really fascinating. It's really interesting how there were so many things done back in the 30s and 40s that were so forward thinking. It's quite amazing when you're not distracted by television what you can accomplish. I've loved restoring some wonderful old gear. I think those are things that come to mind. In recent times, we're making vertical cartridges for my friend John Levin's cylinder player, and that's been a lot of fun. Although it's not antique audio, it's meant to play antique, cylinders, of course. He's gone to conventions and used my cartridge to play a well-known cylinder that had sleigh bells in it, and he said you should have seen the faces on the people when it got to the point of the sleigh bells, because nobody knew what it was prior to that. It had always sounded like broken glass or something else going on, and it was very distinctly sleigh bells. So developing a cartridge that can play a cylinder with high degree of accuracy has been that's been a lot of fun, because there are obviously one of a kind cylinders left. Sometimes only one cylinder left, and you have to play them very carefully and make copies of them for history. So I've enjoyed doing that as well.
That's interesting you mentioned cylinders, because I studied audio at Syracuse University, and they have a very large collection that they were putting in just as I was graduating in the studio of Edison cylinders.
You can look up John Levin's work. It's called the CSP1 or CPS1. It's a really high-end cylinder player.
Is there any other questions from the live here from the members?
Yeah, I have a question. I've always been interested in this idea of doing your own retipping. As you know, sometimes it's hard to get styluses for old cartridges. They aren't made anymore. You can get replacements, other companies that make similar stylus and use those. But my question is, how hard is it? How hard would it be for a to learn to retip a stylus?
That's impossible for me to answer. That's like telling me how you hear. That's like me telling you how you hear.
Well, all right. Let me rephrase it. What equipment would you need, for example, to do this?
Well, if you were a brain surgeon, you might be on the right road. It requires a certain amount of Zen. It requires a certain amount of stillness. It requires research. It requires patience. It requires time, and it requires talent. That's about the best answer I have. And you're welcome to ruin my retirement.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had another question. Revisiting again the idea of where we're going with the vinyl and styluses and cartridges. You have cartridges like a Denon 103, a classic cartridge that's been around for 50 years, and you have your designs. What have we learned, or I mean, those, still the Denon 103 survives and is still considered a masterpiece of a cartridge. What have we learned, and are cartridges better today, just because we have new materials that we've discovered? We have carbon fiber and all these cool things.
Wonderful question. The answer is no. The best analogy that I could give you is, imagine the world ran out of gasoline. So they stopped making cars around the time of the Ford Edsel. And then, 60 years went by, and they discovered this huge reserves of oil. And they said, oh my God, we can start refining gasoline again. So they went back and started making Edsels. That's moving coil cartridges. The moving coil has an inherent limit. B&O did a white paper in the 60s showing that the iterations and generational developments in their design not only outperformed moving coil, but was going to continue to outperform it by a wide margin. That prediction was exactly correct. It's a nautilus that never evolved to perfection. It just evolved to the point where it stopped evolving and became extinct. We've gone back and we're making designs that were around 40 years ago. And the problem with moving coils is you cannot reduce that mass. You can't get around that. And once you can't get around that, you're done. You've hit a ceiling. It's just simple physics. So, there are a lot of people that tout, oh, we're using, unobtainium, magnetic return materials and so on. That's nice for marketing. But you know what? It doesn't translate into performance. I was thrilled to be able to get the license for a technology that is, I believe, superior in a large number of ways, and we list them on our website. There's a page that's called Why Fixed Coil Kicks Ass. You're welcome to look at that. I've tried to explain it in some detail. And of course, the strain gauge, which was invented by Sal Wynn. And people have asked me about other new technology cartridges. And, I've said, just because you can make a wheel doesn't mean it's round. Anything can be done incorrectly. So just because you have a man there with a scalpel doesn't mean he's a surgeon. But moving coils, yes, there's an inherent drawback to them. There are many inherent drawbacks to them. It's why I fix them and I don't make them. I don't manufacture them.
Any other questions?
I can go to some questions that I've received in the past, if that's of use, or if you want me to shut up now, I can do that too.
No, please keep talking.
Yes.
I'll look at some of the other questions I've received in the past, and if anybody has anything, please feel free to interrupt me.
Peter, can I throw out another one then? So in terms of the sort of materials that are popular now for the cantilevers,
Yes.
of course, there's these differences in cost, and so you offer, a set of them, depending on how much, we can pay for them. Is there a sort of best bang for buck material that you feel that there is out there?
No. Different cantilevers. I mean, it's one of the reasons I developed the cactus spine. It's interesting if you look at the life of an engineer. The real life of an engineer is they never get to perfect anything. Either the boss is beating them up, or if they're a small business like mine, the pile of bills stacking up on the desk says, stop developing, stop inventing, and just bring it to market if it works. Engineers are happy when something works, and then they move on. Life says move on. To me, that's a bonanza. To me, that's plus and a minus. The minus is that things have not been perfected or brought nearer to perfection. The plus is that that's a dark area that people just continue to overlook because it worked, like an airplane that worked or a bridge that worked. cartridges are very much that area. There's, as I mentioned, or I tried to allude to, cartridge development stopped basically 40 years ago. Cantilevers are very much like that. There are specific materials that were used, and they work, but that doesn't mean they're perfect. In fact, quite the opposite. Certain materials have certain positive and negative attributes, and that's just the way it is. The development of the cactus cantilever was a real breakthrough in cartridge design. It solved a huge number of problems. So in terms of cantilevers, they sound different. As I mentioned earlier in this talk, there's a large percentage of the DNA that has its camp in the field of musical instruments, and cantilever materials are certainly one of the structures that firmly places a lot of the DNA in the camp of musical instruments. They sound different for reasons that I could explain in part, but they're all different, and some of them are better in certain designs than others. Think of different kinds of woods being used. Think of babinga wood being used for an oboe. Think of different kinds of woods being used for a cello or an acoustic guitar. It's only partly a science. The rest of it's an art.
I posted the link to why fixed coil kicks ass on your chat bar. You can click on that.
I'm just looking through the questions, so if anyone has anything, they can shout out or
jump in.
There are people that have asked me about our mono cartridges. We make a thing called a dual coil mono, and all of our magnetic cartridges are available as dual coil monos. They're really very flexible mono cartridges. There are a lot of people that are mono bigots, and I get that. The thing is, if you play, mono can track with much lower distortion than stereo. And of course, a good mono recording has no phase errors. It's really interesting. Somebody asked me what vinyl I really like, what audiophile recordings do I like. And of course, the Firebird by the Mercury Firebird recording, not the new release. I hate to say it, the new release is just they managed to kill it. What a shame. But back in the 80s, when the first re-release came out, that was a very, very good recording. And one of the things that you can do, by the way, with a phono cartridge, if you want to qualify a phono cartridge, it's sort of like a character of a human being. When times are easy, you don't learn much about a person, but you can learn a lot about them when the going gets tough, and their character starts to show. What is invisible starts to become visible. The same is true with the phono cartridge. What you want to listen for is not when you're listening to when music is pretty much easy going. You want to listen for a bad moment. And when there's a crescendo, a classical crescendo, you want to, in that moment, you want to dissect it and listen how much mud you get, how much mistracking you get. There are moments in that recording, in the Firebird recording, where there's a triangle going on in the background of this incredible crescendo. When you play with the strain gauge, all of the instruments stay perfectly combed out, positioned perfectly in space, but they stay combed out. It never gets muddy. And that's because you have extreme statistical contact with the groove wall. I want to mention something else that the group may find interesting. I've been asked, and the other thing is, somebody asked me what records I like to listen to. I have this switch that I can flip in my brain, and I can listen to a bad recording and just really love the music. I'm really grateful I have that. An example of that is when you listen to a 78 with the strain gauge. That is an amazing experience. It's really the Rosetta Stone. You wouldn't believe the detail that a 78 is capable of, but if you play it with a strain gauge, with a 78 stylus, of course, you just hear things. It's mind-boggling. Every time I built 78 style for people that have bought strain gauges, either for personal use or archival professional use. I wind up playing hooky from my work and sitting in the sound room for an hour or two, fishing out 78s and just sitting there and enjoying them. And I have a switch I can turn where I can turn the noise off and just really appreciate what's there.
Peter, I had a question maybe to insert. Talking about phono preamps, I have a product I won't name, but it does all the phono processing in the digital domain. Have you ever looked into that, or how do you feel just in general, not talking about products, about that idea?
Yeah, how do I feel about digital? So if you look at the history of audio, every time there was an advance, there was a concomitant setback. So originally you had acoustic 78s, then the vacuum tube was invented. So now you have the possibility of cutter heads, phono cartridges, amplifiers, loudspeakers. When they were first developed, they were horrible. It took them a number of years to linearize it. So when they went from 78 to microgroove, there were problems, and then it took them a number of years, and they fixed that. Mono to stereo, that was fixed in relatively short order. Tube to early solid state, although the people that did early solid state really knew what they were doing and how to get around some of the limitations of early solid state, and actually made some interesting early solid state devices. But a lot of solid state devices sounded horrible, especially power amps. And then integrated circuit and so on, which took over recording consoles and made them sound horrible. Took them 30 years to fix IC op amps. Almost every time there's been an advance, there's been a concomitant setback. And the same thing happened with digital. Audiophiles were just throwing up when they heard early CDs. And there were a lot of reasons for that. When you listen to the Firebird, this was recorded with 3 microphones. And just as I mentioned before, a recording engineer is going to record an instrument with a mono mic. He's going to send 70% off here, 30%. He thinks that's an image. That's not an image. That's a fake image. In orchestra, you drop 30 microphones over the orchestra, and one microphone is picking up wrong time sequences, and they're mixing it together. Oh my God, wrong. So this is all done for convenience. It's sort of like a doctor giving a woman who's in the end stages of labor the drug to delay labor because he's got to finish 9 holes. This is a lot of audio is done for convenience, and it has ruined audio. Digital. Somebody once said that digital is like taking a sirloin steak and grinding it up in a hamburger. You're never going to find a chef to make it taste like a sirloin again. Interestingly, there was an article by Ortofon, which I read and I've used at seminars. And I love this article, except it's sort of like catching the football 2 yards from the goal line and just standing in there and looking around at the opposing team coming at you at whatever miles per hour. They wrote something, an Ortofon engineer wrote something fantastic. And people always ask me, what's so great about analog? So these Ortofon engineers wrote that a modest cartridge can detect a groove displacement equivalent to, they said a 10 kilohertz signal recorded 50 dB down was equivalent to a groove displacement of about 50 small hydrocarbon molecules and is easily heard. And I thought, okay, I need to do a little math here. And so I looked up the atomic distance of some small hydrocarbon molecules. I think I chose benzene. And I said, well, if a modest cartridge can pick up 50, a really good cartridge in tone arm could probably pick up, let's be conservative, 20. So then I called that the step size, 20 benzene molecules. And then I started looking at the quietest signal in the groove to the loudest, and I compared that to bit resolution with digital. And it turns out that a really good analog system is between 200 and 500 times more resolving to bit level, than the best digital system out there, than 24-bit. I don't know why when Ortofon did that article, they didn't just go all the way and say, by the way, if you want to do bit level resolution, forget sample rate, just bit level resolution. A really good system can be between 200 and 500 times more resolving than digital. So am I in favor of taking an analog signal and digitizing it? No. In principle, no. I'm in favor of making the best damn analog system that you can make, from the cartridge to the tone arm to the table to all the way out, and that's analog. You want to do digital, fine. Digital's great, do digital. But when it comes to analog, I'm a purist. And I kind of have to be as a designer manufacturer. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
Maybe just a follow-up question to what Chris was asking about the phono preamps. So at SoundSmith, Peter, it's like there's a couple of them, and when you look out on the market, there's so many out there using both tube and transistor technology. And can you tell us a little bit about your philosophy and what you've presented?
Sure. I think it falls very much aligned with what I've been chatting about, which is let me put the three or four most important things at the top of the list and do them. Tubes have a lot of positive things going for them. Am I a tube fan? No, personally, I'm not. Why? Because tubes have inherent levels of distortion that you can't get rid of. Fortunately, they tend to be even order harmonics, so second, fourth, sixth, whereas a lot of solid state designs are odd order harmonics, which are very non-musical. And again, earlier in the conversation, I said there are things you can do to enhance sound, which are not natural or accurate, but are still very pleasant. So I'll be the last one to say they're inappropriate. But as a designer, I have to have the lowest distortion electronics that I can have. So that's what I've designed in my preamps and power amplifiers. So my preamp designs are ultra low distortion. They're solid state. And I use very, very high-end components. Even though the box looks cheap, I put the money inside. I don't put it in the box. And they're frankly very expensive for us to make. There are times I've considered discontinuing them. Sort of a loss leader product. It's interesting, when there were early reviewers, one was by Michael Fremer and another was by Thomas Holmes, of the early Cicero cartridge. I sent those out with our MCP2 preamp, the early design. And both reviewers came back with the same observation, which I was really pleased, because I think often you can't rely on reviewers to get what you need. But they both came back and said, if you have X number of dollars to spend, don't split it half on the cartridge and half on the preamp. Get the SoundSmith Cicero and get the SoundSmith phono preamp. You'll be way ahead of the game. So what I did was I developed phono preamps that were I considered very high-end designs, but kept the price as low as I possibly could so I wouldn't lose my shirt, in the hopes that people would push more of their funds into a higher performance, higher costing SoundSmith cartridge and get our preamp with it, and they would therefore be just way ahead of the game. It's easier to do with electronics if you do it properly, to develop a high-end product, than it is to do with a phono cartridge. So we make two models of low gain for moving magnet or high output cartridges, and we make one model of phono preamp, the MCP2, for low output cartridges, which has adjustable loading with a knob. I think we were the first ones to do that on the market. So it'll go from 10 ohms to 5,000 ohms. So you can tweak it to just where you're hearing, your system, your room tells you, oh, this sounds just right to me.
Peter, I wanted to follow up on your talk about distortion. I've been watching some videos, interviews with engineers in the hi-fi realm, and they talk about the use of feedback in circuit design and the ability to really get ultra-low distortion figures, but the feeling that you can go too far and it's not as musical, that there's some compromise that one has to reach. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Feedback was a real breakthrough. I think Armstrong invented it. He was the fellow who invented FM. Negative feedback was absolutely brilliant. It extended bandwidth, it lowered distortion orders of magnitude. It was a brilliant idea. But of course, because the input of a circuit is before the output of a circuit, when you couple negative feedback in, it's not perfectly in phase. So it adds some of its own very unique distortions. When I worked with Richard Majestic at RAM Audio, we developed a power amplifier that had, again, the philosophy that I mentioned early on. It had limited number of stages. It was an amazingly low parts count preamp, power amp, and every stage was optimized. Every stage was made as linear as possible, and it had minimum feedback. It's a really interesting early solid state design that is so musical, in part because it's a low feedback design. So just like drinking, too much of a good thing is not good.
If I can interrupt here for a second, one of the things I found out in the early days of solid state, where they had a lot of linearity problems and they were trying to fix them with feedback. And by definition, as you were saying, Peter, feedback occurs afterwards. And there were some cases where there was a gross lack of gain bandwidth product. And as a result, in certain cases, the feedback was actually producing worse results than if you had no feedback at all. But nowadays, if you look at the devices that are out, especially some of the integrated circuits, the gain bandwidth product is incredibly high, so that this phase or this lag is not anywhere, even in the same galaxy as the early circuits were.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, which is why you can build some really amazing stuff today without going nuts. Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Going back to the early circuitry, it's very interesting what Marantz and McIntosh did, because especially McIntosh, they had a real challenge moving from tubes to solid state. How are we going to do this? We've been in this one camp of tube technology and the whole world's moving to solid state. How can we go there and not have this completely different sound? And what they did and what Marantz did was really fascinating. The Marantz 7T preamp, which was the transistorized version of the Marantz 7. What they did was they built really high voltage circuits. So if you look at the early Mac solid state design in the Marantz 7T, the power supplies were up at 45 volts, plus minus 45 volts. An op amp or integrated circuit uses plus minus 18 typically. Plus and minus 45 or 50 volts. Why did they do that? Well, because you have what's called the hysteresis curve, which shows the distortions at opposite ends. But if you have a lot of voltage, that curve gets big, and if you're only using this much in the middle of it, you're inherently extremely linear. And that's how Marantz and the early solid state and Mac got away with making early solid state gear that actually sounded really, really good. They were very, very low distortion. That's how they did it.
There's some op amps now too that'll run at like plus minus 40 volts.
Yes, there are. But again, that's not just because bathing beauties are on beaches and turtles are on beaches doesn't mean turtles are bathing beauties. So just because you have a high voltage op amp doesn't mean it's necessarily a great op amp. But
I think the reason for that is in commercial applications where you need to swing more voltage.
Yeah, video drivers and such, all of that is high voltage stuff, RF circuits. Yeah.
We got another question on chat. Peter, what about transimpedance phonostages?
Gee, that's a great question.
That's Jose.
So, okay. So it's amazing what fads come in and out. So people want to think about phono cartridges. I'll try to keep this not too technical for people that don't have a engineering background. So people want to think about phono cartridges as voltage sources. How can I explain this simply? Here, think of it like this. If I have a car battery and I have a bunch of little dry cells and I put them all in series, I put enough dry cells in series, gives me a 12-volt car battery. The inside source toughness, its impedance, from the little dry cells, little pen light batteries, let's say, is not like your car battery. Your car battery can deliver a tremendous amount of current, a lot of kick. The dry cells can't. That is because of the internal impedance. The same is true with phono cartridges. So you have a high output cartridge, which is more of a voltage source. And you have a low output cartridge, which starts to approach a current source because its resistance, its internal resistance, can be as low as an ohm, whereas your high output cartridge can be hundreds and hundreds of ohms. Trans impedance or current preamps, as they're sometimes called, are treating a cartridge like it's a current source. Is that good or bad? So you're using a cartridge that's 1 ohm internal impedance or a half or even less. Is that a good thing? Well, yes and no. The problem with using a cartridge that has really, really low internal impedance is that you're depending on the connections, the terminations at the back of the cartridge, the tone arm and clips, to never degrade. So even a, milliohm, not 1 milliohm, but as those connections get a little oxide on them and the connection resistance starts to increase, you're really impacting the performance of the cartridge. Inherently, I'm not a fan of transconductance preamps. I'm also personally not a fan of them because they don't work with our cartridges. They're dependent for wide bandwidth on the cartridge having low inductance, very, very low inductance. Our low output cartridges don't have low inductance. You cannot use them with transconductance preamps. What's the plus of a transconductance preamp? You get away with not using a step-up transformer. So a lot of DIY designs are transconductance preamps because they're pretty easy to build. So that's kind of cool. But now you got to go out and find a cartridge that's, got really low source impedance, and it's got very low output, 0.1 millivolts, and it's like an ohm or two. I did make transconductance versions of SoundSmith cartridges as an experiment. We were working with BMC, and we wanted to be able to approach that market. My good buddy, name is just flew out of my head, is now come out with a transconductance preamp on the market. So again, my problem is producing too many different things. I built SoundSmith versions of 3 of our cartridges where the internal impedance is 1/10 of an ohm. And I've tried them with transconductance preamps. They work perfectly, but the market is small and the subject confuses people. So I have to be careful not to confuse customers or myself. And generally, I wind up confusing myself.
Anybody else?
Following up on that? Following up on that, the SoundSmith cartridges, you can sell them at a variety of voltage outputs. Are they more suited to one level, or it's just up to the phono preamp that we're going to use?
Yeah, it is, and that's the beauty. It's one of the beauties of the SoundSmith cartridge, whereas with a moving coil, you have to add more windings or more mass in order to get more output. With a fixed coil design, you can change the coils around and you still get the same performance out of the cartridge. So I've been asked, why did we relegate not all, but our very high-end designs to low output? And the answer is it's market-driven, because that's where most of the really expensive phono preamps are. They've been designed for really expensive moving coil cartridges. So I'm forced by the market to keep a couple of my really top designs as low output designs. In principle, going through a transformer is a bad thing. I said earlier that the best thing you can do for a signal is to pass it through as few components as possible and make them as linear as possible. Running without a transformer is a great thing. So in principle, a high output cartridge with a simplified lower gain preamp is a good thing. But how many ultra high-end, low-gain preamps are there in the market? Not many. So my choices are in part driven by market needs.
Peter, shifting to me.
Actually, exactly the question I was sort of trying to get at. So thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Peter, I wanted to shift back to music for a second. I own several of your direct race recordings, and they're quite special. I'm very enamored with the Bill Frisell records you did for several reasons. I'm a giant Bill Frisell fan, and also he was playing some custom Parker guitars. I'm also a Parker guitar fan, so that record was. It took me forever to get a copy because you go out of print pretty regularly on that, but I was able to score one eventually. So, any interesting tidbits on that session?
You know, I have to tell you, Ken Parker, I met Ken because of my friend Arnold Schnitzer, who's one of the finest bass luthiers in the world. I've known Arnold since I was 14. And Arnold was great. He called me up one day and said, you know, there's somebody you really need to meet for your direct race project to rescue children. For those of you that don't know, I have a record project called Direct Race Records to rescue children from severe forms of child slave labor. And there are 215 million children in the world that would be far better off dead. Their lives are unimaginably difficult and painful. And so we rescue handfuls at a time with this project. I think we've rescued 300 or 400 children so far. We're looking for somebody to act as executive director of this project. Somebody who's retired and is really interested in philanthropic work. So after a conversation with Arnold, he said, yeah, you really need to meet Ken. He'd probably be interested in what I said, how long have you known this guy? He said, I've known him forever. I said, well, why don't you call him Arnold? And he went, oh, yeah, good idea. I'll call you later. Hangs up. Half an hour later, Ken Parker calls me, and we were on the phone for an hour, and it was like we've been brothers our whole lives. 2 weeks later, Ken calls me, and he goes, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? I said, gluing my fingers together. And he said, I'm bringing Bill Frisell and Doug Womble up. Can you record them? And I said, yeah, I can do that. So these two guys, I got some engineers together and made sure the lathe was still humming. And they came up and we cut 4 sides in 3 hours. They had a gig that night, I think at the Vanguard in the city or somewhere. And as Bill Frisell's a great guy, he's a man of few words. And as he was leaving, he shook my hand and he looked at me very sincerely and he said, today was a good day. and I just never forgot that he said that to me, because how often do you get to spend 3 hours doing something that can rescue children from severe forms of slave labor? And he felt like he'd get a good night's sleep that night, and he had done something really good. And it is a wonderful recording. It's just this great, clean, both of them were facing each other. We had a panel between them, XY mics on either of them. So you got this incredible image like they're right in front of you. Doug Womble was singing in part. And I'm hoping to reproduce that record. Again, you know, the company in my life has been very difficult in general because of all the things that we do, but the pandemic has made it even worse. And it's painful because work like Direct Grace and helping the children in the world that are in those kinds of situations, they had taken a backseat before all this happened, and now they're so far off the map, it's just really painful. So I hope to reproduce that recording at some point soon. We actually have a recording. I'll give you a bit of an exclusive. We have a recording we're going to be doing shortly. You know, you've all seen Field of Dreams. Direct Grace Project has really there's been so much divine intervention here. I mean, I've normally said I only need 3 proofs of God. One of them is 100% Kona coffee. The second one are dogs. And the third one is cheese. In fact, I've determined that if I ever find that I'm terminal, I'm going to commit cheesicide. It's just a personal thing. But from the moment I decided to start the Direct Grace Project, it's like Field of Dreams. People have shown up, people have volunteered. I've had recording engineers, well-known recording engineers, standing around the hall outside like they're lost. And I'm going, can I help you? They go, yeah, I'm supposed to be here. I just don't know why. Well, what do you do? And they send the recording engineer. Oh, come on in. I know you're here. Everything has pretty much gone like that. So I'm good. The first recording we did was with John Poussette-Dart. I spoke with his manager, John Condon, told him about the project. Always been a fan of John's. John Pusset Dart. And he said, well, I'm going to speak to John in a little while. I have to talk to him. I'll give him your number. John Pusset Dart calls me. We're on the phone for 20 minutes. He says, I'm totally in. I'm going to be up in the area in 2 weeks. John Pusset Dart comes in. He's here for 4 hours. We cut 4 sides. And he and I have since become good friends. So over the years, he's talked to me about his early recordings, his early 4 albums. Now, those were on Atlantic. That got sold to other companies, eventually wound up at Universal. Universal releases nothing. They release absolutely nothing. They are holding on like this to their music. John has the rights to the music, but not to those recordings, because his lawyer was brilliant during an age when most musical lawyers weren't. But the recordings, that he's tried for years to get the recordings. So about a year ago, his music attorney is at a conference, sitting next to a gentleman, talking to him. And she says, well, you know, one artist I have, John Pusset Dart, we're trying to get the recordings for a charity project called Direct Grace Records at Universal, but you know, there isn't even anyone you can talk to at Universal. And this guy says, well, I'm a music lawyer with Universal. And she says, really? They talk for a while. It goes up the chain. I get a call from her. They're releasing the 4 recordings for Direct Grace. We are going to make 4 of John's first albums. I'm not sure how we're going to do it. It might be half speed. I may do half speed 45 LPs. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yes.
And we're going to do a box set of his first 4 albums. And I'm just hoping to rescue a whole bucket full of children with this project. Certainly the pandemic put a big dent in it, and funding, because I've been funding Direct Grace personally up till now. But that's coming down the line. And we will also reproduce the Bill Frisell recording, and the John Pusset Dart were sold out, and we'll do that. The one we did here, just him on acoustic guitar. That's a lovely recording. It's just he's sitting in front of you. It's just a lovely thing. So
Fantastic.
We have another question.
Yeah.
Do you think old NOS tubes like Telefunken are better than current production of tubes?
absolutely. You know, I have boxes of rare tubes here, which I've acquired, and I think I've put it in my will that I'm going to be, you know, when they plant me in the ground, they're going to dump all the tubes, put a layer of NOS tubes, you know, a lot of Telefunkens and gold lions, you know, just to keep the animals out, and then they'll put dirt on top of those. Yeah, there were a lot of really beautiful tubes made back then. And again, here's the perfect example of what I was talking about earlier about the real loss to audio is the loss of the legendary, you know, or legacy engineers. There were people that knew how to make tubes. There were people that knew how to make really, really good tubes. And they were trade secrets with various companies, not well documented. And it's lost. It's lost.
All right. I think that'll be the last question now. We're going to continue on with the second part of our meeting. Peter and John, thanks very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and look for that deal that we're doing with your friends over at Overture.
Overture, yeah, and actually, Chris Murphy is here on the meeting here. They're a member of the DC Hi-Fi group in our dealer category, so it's great to have those guys, and I appreciate you guys offering up that deal. So, members, if you saw the last newsletter, you saw the deal that our members can get over at Overture on select cartridges. So feel free to take advantage of it. I'm thinking about taking advantage of it, actually.
There isn't a better Christmas present that you can give than you can give to yourself. Yeah, and that would be the SoundSmith cartridge. And
you guys are welcome back anytime.
Yeah, and I hope to see you at the CAF 2021 in next November, if everything goes well.
Well, we hope so. Yeah. And, you know, that's November, so I think we'd be down the road and we'd probably be there. So come and see us in our room.
All right.
Thank you, Peter. I enjoyed your meeting.
Enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
This one was great, too.
Okay, couldn't hear everybody, but I don't see anybody crying in their beer, so I guess it went.
Thank you, Peter. All right, guys, real quickly, we'll just go down the roundup of the scheduling of the newsletter agenda that I had. So just an update. I'm working with Russ. I thought he was going to tune into the meeting here, but he didn't. But we're moving the DAC round up to January because we need a bit more time because there's a couple of other DACs I think that we're going to be able to get in, and that it's probably going to be the January timeframe. So stay tuned on that. Let's see very quickly. Membership dues renewal. I haven't been really renewing anybody during the spring and the summer and the fall. So most people's memberships have expired or close to expiring, even the 2 years. So in January, we're going to do a major effort. Although, Ali, I will tell you that I did find yours and a couple of other checks. Remember you told me that you had sent me a check back in the winter or the spring or whatever. It happened to be that the Kensington P.O. box, they had stuck those checks in somebody else's box, and they got pulled back out after a certain time and got stashed to the side. And then they told me that they had these checks that they had found. So I did find yours and 3 others.
That's cool. So we in fact we can blame the Postal Service then.
Yes, we can. So anyway, I'll just just apply that to the next one. So
Sounds
on
good.
that end, we're good. We're working on that. I'm hoping to do the scheduling of that first DC Hi-Fi group, that virtual listening session that we discussed maybe a meeting or 2 back, where we're going to send out the recordings, and then we'll have a virtual meeting, and then we'll discuss it. So we're talking about doing the Horowitz, the personal recordings, which were his own recordings that he paid for at Carnegie Hall from 1945 to 1950. So, and I just think it's very interesting how other than some of the noise on the 78s, like Peter was talking about, how much detail there is on these recordings. And I look forward to sharing those with you guys so you can tell me what you think of it as well, artistically and from a sound perspective. Let's see. All right. So just to reiterate the discount that we were just talking about at Overture. Did you guys see that in the latest email newsletter?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay. So everybody's good on that. So if you're interested in the SoundSmith cartridge, feel free to check out the guys over at Overture. So let's see what else. That's pretty much it. Chris, did you have any new things? I think did we record this? Are we recording this one for the YouTube?
Thankfully, I actually missed the first 15 minutes, but I suddenly realized that I needed to be recording, so I have recorded it. So I missed. I didn't get the first 15 minutes. I apologize,
Okay.
but I have a recording going right now. So
Okay.
yes, I will post this to YouTube after our meeting ends, so
Okay.
people can watch it at a later time.
Okay, and then we also have up on the YouTube site now the first in the series of the dealer service providers in our area. The first one we did was Russ, the Vinyl Reviver. So that's up there. Where's Jose? Jose, you still there? No, he exited. Oh, there you are. Paul and I are coming up sometime soon, so to shoot yours. So get ready.
Yeah, our YouTube site's cruising along. Let's see, my VTV amplifier thing has gotten over, I think, up to about 1.3 thousand views. I mean, it's really, people are getting a lot of interest in what we're up to here. So,
yeah.
As I've said before, as John and I were talking, anyone that wants to do a selfie with their system or any topic that they'd like to talk about their audio experiences or experiments, do it on a cell phone. Just hold the darn thing up and do a selfie, and I'll do the video editing, as I say, for free.
Yeah, we're going to start that. That'll be the next thing, the system profiles. So the folks who want to do that, if you're not comfortable doing the selfie thing or whatever, then Paul can come over and shoot it as well, so we can do the profile of your system. So we're going to start that in January.
Chris, how do we get the file to you?
Well, I would prefer maybe put it up on one of the cloud storage like OneDrive or Dropbox or Google Drive. That would be the best way because the files are a little bit large, and
Yeah.
I don't really want it clogging up my email if possible.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'll make you a YouTube star. That's my promise.
I don't want to be in the video though.
Well, you don't have to. You don't have to. You can just be.
Yeah, you don't have to show your face or anything. Yeah,
Behind
you
the
can
scenes.
just
I mean, there's many
do a
ways
pan.
to. What I would suggest is go on YouTube, look at some. There's YouTube videos on everything. There's tons of hi-fi stuff on there now and everything. So, look at what other people are doing, and choose a style that's comfortable, and I'll make you look good in the video editing.
Okay.
All right, Chris. Anything else?
No, I did not prepare anything today. I knew we had a star person with Peter Ledermann, so I felt I could take the meeting off, so to speak.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting speaker.
He was wonderful, as I thought he would be. He's a great raconteur and also very knowledgeable, and he just enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yep.
John, I'd like to make a suggestion that after this virus is behind us, for expats like me who can't get down to the meetings a lot, that somehow in the meetings we have a way to continue this virtual session so that people who are not, and not only people who are far away like me, some people who may not be able to get in on a particular day, physically can participate in the meetings. I know that I've been doing that with the Boston Audio Society meetings. They started their Zoom meetings. And we've got people from Australia and Europe and everything participating. Makes the meetings much more interesting.
Yeah, we can do that, right, Chris?
Absolutely. We have the technology.
Good.
All right. Let's see. Anything else from anybody else? Let's see. Gary didn't chime in. I was trying to get what he had heard about the trade show, Capital Audio Fest, and the Seattle show, just to get updates. But he's not here today. Let's see. I want to let you know that the winners of the music was Joe Cicerelli and Barry Galvin. Joe got the Joe Pass Herb Ellis recording, and Barry got the Chet Baker LP. Congratulations, folks. All right. Anything else? I know we've had a long meeting, but it's been quite interesting. Peter's presentation was great.
It was fantastic. If we can, let's keep it up. John, I know you have so many great industry connections. I'm sure you'll find some other people that would like to talk to us.
Yeah, actually, John CEO at Benchmark and I are trying to
love
work
to
on
have
the
him
schedule.
on.
Yeah,
very much.
because he's a very, very interesting guy, and he is a measurement guy and everything, but he has a lot of interesting things to say. So yeah, I've been talking to him about it, and so yeah, there definitely will be more. Yeah, it's what we have to do right now. For the this interim period. Although we'll continue for the people who want to venture out, to our little happy hours. We'll continue to to have those. They still up at Quincy's, they still have their little outside tent, and you can get your burger night and that sort of thing for the folks that want to come in. I've been talking to Matt's about maybe doing one in DC, in Adams Morgan down where he is. So probably going to do one, for whoever wants to show up, bring your mask. And if you can, we find a place that you can, have a nice spaced out table. So just to get a couple of us together every once in a while.
Hey, John.
Yes.
It's Chris Murphy.
Hey, Chris.
How's everyone doing today? I just thought when I was at Capital Audio Fest this year, of course, I was just focusing on making sure Overture was set up properly. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what Peter actually had on display, but if for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to hear Peter's end-to-end system from strain cage, from tone arm for that matter, to strain gauge cartridge to his bookshelf speakers, it is really a wonderful, wonderful experience. I mean, if you, it's just, it was fun to watch Peter kind of take apart the speaker and tweak it on our bench before, the presentation to the Philadelphia area audio group. But it's a real treat. He rarely puts it together. But if you ever get a chance and you see that he's at a show with that system, it's just wonderful. It just shows you if you've got a designer who understands every aspect of audio electronics and speakers and cartridges, and you put it in one chain, it is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So for anybody on the lookout, you see shows that, 2021, hopefully we get back to it and you have a chance to see that. Highly recommended.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
I agree with that. I mean, I regularly would say that his room at CAF is always one of the best sounding rooms at the show. Personally, that's I'm always amazed at what he's doing.
Did he have it, Chris, end to end this year, including his speakers?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
great.
and these speakers are not large. That's what just blows you away.
Yeah,
It's-
the
it-
Monarch.
Bookshelves.
you say this is impossible. How am I hearing what I'm hearing? It's just the whole thing is amazing, and that's why I literally spend hours in his room. I'm
No,
sorry.
it's worthwhile. We had it in kind of one of our second to largest listening rooms, and where we never put bookshelf speakers into, and we did it because of crowd size, and it didn't matter. It filled the room with sound.
Yeah.
It was not relevant. The size of the room is not relevant for that system.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Chris, you sell the Monarchs?
No, I mean, there are those you would totally get through Peter.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
we can get the it's, as he said, he hand builds. He hand builds all of his electronics, his preamplifier, his power amplifier, the strain gauge preamplifier. Of course, he modifies those existing speakers, but yeah, we can obtain some of them, the speakers, but usually you want to go through Peter himself. Depending where you are, he might shoot it to us, but definitely if you've got any questions on it, I would connect with Peter, but we can sell them. They're pretty special stuff.
Yeah, I really love those speakers. I was just looking down the road, that once we open the meetings back up sometimes, to maybe get a pair of those in for demo.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would do, if I was to do that at Overture again, I would want to do the end system for you all, because it's really to hear the speakers by themselves with somebody else's system. Yes, do I think they'll probably sound wonderful, but to really, if you're going to get his modified speakers and have one of his, his electronics are not inexpensive, but to hear that as a system, as Chris was saying, it's just a wonderful, wonderful speaker. And I don't think there's any manufacturer who has the capability of designing an end-to-end system like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we could do it that way. Yeah, that'll work.
John, I wanted to get a quick plug in as usual for the forums, the DC Hi-Fi Group forums. Yeah. We've got a lot of good discussions going on all sorts of topics. I try to seed some ideas and topics as I come across things up there, and people will respond and have a good discussion on things. So if you're not a member, I think we've got most of the people on there, but there's always room for more. There's no crowding limits, no social distancing issues.
That's right.
Everything is all very copacetic up there, so feel free to, if you haven't signed up, please just sign up. It's part of your membership benefits. It's an exclusive, so please come on by.
All right. Hello, Peter Chang. I see you there. How are you? All right. Any other questions? It was a great meeting. I appreciate everybody showing up, and we'll do more. Jose, we'll see you soon with doing our video shoot, and everybody else, think about doing your system profiles. Email me or Chris about how if you guys are interested in doing it, so we can put it in the calendar for posting and announcing it and everything, and how you want to do it, whether you want to do your own selfie with your phone or have Paul come over. So feel free to let us know on that.
Okay, and everybody have a safe and good holiday season.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're getting all situated.
Yeah, month or two, I'll be all set.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
John.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Chris.
Bye, John.
See you later.